Excuse me. Welcome back. Okay, so still looking at Pacific War, and we're conducting a battle scenario number 4, Battle for the Eastern Solomons. And it's a little interesting inflection point here, I guess, is what I would call it, or a stage in the evolution of things. What we have is two task forces for which they include the infantry units being carried on destroyers. I was trying to be clever just in case we ended up in some sort of sea battle and not have one of the infantry units on the troop transport. Don't know if that's technically allowed, but I do know you can transport infantry on destroyers. So I put both my infantry units on the destroyers. Anyway, advance into this hex, get spotted, fine. It's night. There's no real air missions available at night that I'm aware of. I would have to double check that. In fact, let me just do that real quick. Yeah, so you can do some things in night, but it's pretty tricky. The US can use their L2 level fighters, can be alerted and conduct cap against a Japanese strike in a target hex. There were no strikes allocated. And then, well, there are some night fighters, but we don't have those available. Flak is going to be halved at night. And certain Japanese units, their T-L2 units can conduct strikes against task forces only. And let me see what else there was. Oh, and that might have been something interesting. I think in the last battle cycle, we probably should have rolled for the Japanese and the Americans, actually, the aircraft that conducted the strikes should have made a dusk roll for damage. So we missed that. I'll go back and look at that and see what that does to both sides' forces. We'll go from there. But let's continue this conversation here. So nevertheless, landed the troops here, and then we move through to the bombard phase, and that allows us to take the ships that are here and bombard the airfield. And we put 9 hits on the airfield, and that would eliminate all of the American aircraft that are at the field, and then some. So luckily I didn't transfer any from one of the other aircraft carriers here, because they all would have been killed off with that very impressive set of die rolling. So the bombard was entirely effective. Now, that interdicts the base, and we have troops on the ground at Guadalcanal. The way I'm reading the victory conditions for this, it says Japanese win if they land at least 1 battalion of ground units on Guadalcanal, and if they either interdict Henderson Field at any time or at the end of one battle cycle have eliminated all US air units on Guadalcanal. So I think we've fulfilled the obligations of the victory conditions, and I believe it doesn't say it's an automatic victory, so but I assume that it is based on what I'm reading. So what I'm thinking here is that we should at least play one more cycle, because I'm curious to see if there's anything that the Americans can do in terms of because the base, I got to check whether the base is going to change hands or not, because technically the base is garrisoned and has a force there, and this scenario is not sort of showing you the ground battle, the ground combat side of things, I don't believe. And so there's no combat unit in that hex, and I don't know that the base changes hands in terms of ownership based on what I'm reading in the scenario, because that's not part of the scenario per se. So, being a little gamey, I'm wondering if I can land some aircraft in here and keep the scenario going in this phase for to whatever extent that it's worthwhile doing, just so we get a few more reps in doing some flak and some airstrikes and other bits and pieces with the game system and stuff like that. So that's kind of my quick little 2 cents here. It's, you know, each discrete mechanic in of itself is pretty straightforward and relatively easy to use. One of the things that, you know, I struggled with the old system, the old rule book and the old version of the rules was, you know, you did spend a lot of time flip-flopping around in the rules to make sure you're doing things right. But here there's a lot less of that. But nevertheless, this is still a relatively involved exercise and can be a cause for a little bit of confusion unless you're very structured and careful with what you're doing, because the things need to happen in a certain sequence. For instance, I moved these ships in here because it was the advantage movement phase, or actually it was the disadvantage movement phase. They moved in, and then technically, no, it wasn't. It was the advantage movement phase. So we moved in. We would have had potential to do naval combat, but there was no naval combat, no other enemy ships there. That allowed us to unload, and then you bombard. Well, I did it in the reverse because I would move the ships, and I thought, well, I want to shoot with the ships, so I'll shoot with them. But you don't do that until later. It comes after any naval combat and after movement. And then you go through the rest of the exercise. Anyway, so a little bit of a yet another ramble. I hope you're enjoying these, and if you're not, please tell me and I'll stop. Okay, I promise, because this is involved. It's fun, but it's involved.